But now I'd like to introduce to you Hilary Notley and Cerise Reynolds from DEFRA's noise team. And just as a very brief introduction, Hilary is somebody who joined the civil service some time ago from Loughborough University and had a career in noise parts of MOD, as well as in DEFRA itself, where she heads up the evidence team for with an interest in both noise modeling and health impacts. And Cerise has started working in the noise team earlier this year, and she's working on noise mapping and has an interest in environmental noise regulations as well. So this is going to be a double act. I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but we're looking forward to hearing your talks.
Thank you. So thanks for having us here this afternoon. And as you can see by the slides, we'll be giving you an update on the work that we're doing in DEFRA at the moment. So I'll just go through how the session will be run. I'll start with a quick round of introduction, so you just know who will be speaking to you today. Then I'll give an update on the policy work that we're doing in the team before handing over to my colleague Hilary, who'll be talking about a new project that we're unveiling, and then we'll move to discussions and questions at the end. So my name is Cerise and I'm based in the Noise and Nuisance Policy team, and my colleague Hilary is the evidence lead on the team. I've also inserted our team mailbox address, so if you wish to contact us after the session with any questions, please feel free to do so. We'll be glad to hear from you. So DEFRA has a cross-governmental overarching policy remit for environmental noise management. And in our role within DEFRA, we actually intersect with a lot of other government departments. So we actually input into the work of other government departments. So this includes the Department for Transport, where we're having conversations at the moment to agree the policy approach to the strategic noise maps and noise action plans for sources of noise from road, rail and aviation noise. And during the presentation, we'll be able to tell you more about the environmental noise regulations work that we're actually doing at the moment. We intersect with the Department for Transport on aviation strategy and their night flight restriction consultation, just to ensure that noise is properly considered. And we also work with DLUC as well. So we particularly intersect with DLUC on reviewing the planning system. So DLUC are actually leading a major planning reforms, and where they've invited us to, we actually feed into that and provide our noise concerns, just to make sure noise is continually championed and that they're considering noise whilst they're developing their reforms. We've also had the opportunity to feed into decision making around local government COVID response and recovery. And we've tried to make sure that noise was not overlooked during lockdown. And we had the opportunity to feed in concerns about the handling of outdoor hospitality and extensions to use of that. So for example, the use of pub gardens and increased pub opening hours. We intersect with BEIS as well on product standards, so that includes things like fireworks. And as part of the future energy strategy, one of the active conversations we're actually having at the moment is around the noise impacts from air source heat pumps. And we're actually securing a good level of engagement just to ensure that their energy strategy and any net zero proposals that they consider actually take into account noise impacts from these air source heat pumps. We work closely with the UK HSA, formerly known as PHE. So they actually provide advice on the health effects of noise, and they sit on the IGCBN. So IGCBN is actually the interdepartmental group on costs and benefits. And you may be aware that the World Health Organization published its environmental noise guidelines for the European region in 2018. In response, the government has actually committed to reviewing the evidence which has been made public since the WHO review was carried out. So there's been a lot of new evidence that has come out since the WHO published its guidelines. And that's come into the public domain after the work they've done. And in response to this, the government convened the IGCBN. The IGCBN are a group of experts and policy officials from across government. So this is policy officials and experts too from across government. And they provide advice and analysis relating to the quantification and valuation of impacts of environmental noise on health. The IGCBN have recently commissioned evidence around sleep disturbance and looked at the health impacts, including annoyance and cardiovascular disease. So at the end of the process, we'll be considering whether updates are needed to the way noise is valued at the moment in making government decisions, and this will potentially result in updates to the Treasury Green Book. And one of the important developments around our thinking is around noise, is soundscape, and it's one of the things that we're interested in at the moment. So the soundscape concept focuses on engaging with local communities, and this is typically urban areas, about the type of soundscape that they most value. So it's getting their opinion on things that they value, and positive sounds as well as negative sounds, and then taking this into account in the approach to local planning and development. And I'm pleased to tell you about the work DEFRA is doing to support a project which is run by Leeds University and the University College of London. So the project is actually designed to kickstart work on putting monetary value on the benefits of soundscape intervention. So it's looking at both positive and negative sounds. And valuation of these positive impacts may in future allow policy decisions in a range of areas, including transport and planning, just to be taken on better informed decisions as a result of the evidence that we will glean. I'm now going to pass you over to my colleague Hilary, who will talk about the work that we're doing on the environmental noise regulations and an exciting project that we're working on at the moment.
Thanks, Cerise. So I'm sure some of you are aware of the environmental noise regs. They're derived from EU legislation, and they require us to map noise on a 5-year rolling basis, mainly from transport, railways and airports, but also in large urban areas, and those areas include industrial noise as well. And then as a result of the mapping, we develop action plans which are adopted by Secretary of State. And these identify the worst affected areas and target action at those worst affected areas. So we're currently in the phase of round 4. The mapping's due to be completed by next summer, and the action plans the following year. And DEFRA apply the regs in England, but there are also very similar requirements in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. However, as Tim mentioned, there's been a thing called Brexit, and because this is EU-derived legislation, DEFRA will be, or has committed to try and review that legislation over the next spending review period, so the next three years or so, to see whether it's fit for purpose and whether it's best targeted to what the country needs. But to do that, we need sound evidence. And the pun is intended, because it's reflecting the new focus that Cerise mentioned in that the direction that the noise community is starting to move to look at soundscapes, so to consider positive benefits of sound as well as the negative aspects of noise. And so we're building a model that will not only do the mapping required for the statutory requirements, but will also allow us to develop a more enhanced evidence base on which to base any conclusions from the review of these regulations. And that's what I'd like to tell you a bit about today. So the objective of this model that we're building is that it will be more agile and more useful, could possibly say, than the way we've approached things in the past, where for each of the first 3 rounds, we went out and effectively commissioned someone to deliver us the results that we required. So we had a static 5-yearly look at what the noise level was every 5 years. Because we're actually purchasing the model this time rather than just the results, we'll then be able to use that model to do scenario planning. So an example would be that this model is initially going to be based on 2022 or data from 2021 delivered in 22, because that's what the statutory requirement is. We're still in recovery from the pandemic at that point, as we've heard. Road traffic noise levels might be back to pre-pandemic levels, but we're aware that public transport, rail and aircraft are not. So hopefully we'll be able to track the recovery of those and what the impact will be on the noise environment as a result. We can also look backwards. If we've got a good source of data from the right peak of the lockdown, if you had a peak in the lockdown, you can enter that into the model and see what how the noise environment changed then as well. But not only is this DEFRA's model, but we're hoping to make it available to other public bodies that want to use it. So there'll be a database that contains the core data, which, although some of it is licensed, because a lot of it is based on Ordnance Survey data, which is subject to licensing restrictions, will be made available to public bodies. So if a local authority wants to take a section of that model that covers their patch, take a look at it and do some investigations of their own, they can. They can either do that within the modelling system that DEFRA's developing, or they can take that data away and use it in their own modelling systems that they prefer to use. So we've already got interest from some local authorities. Some of you may even have been approached to feed into the design of the model. But we've got interest from National Highways, as they're called now, formerly Highways England, and Department for Transport are interested in the rail side of this. And we're covering not just National Rail, but also local light rail systems. So West Midlands, trams, Manchester trams, Newcastle, Metro. There are a number of them. I've missed some, I'm sure. So the idea is that any public body that wants to use this data and or the model can. If their data that they produce is then something that they want in the public domain, they can feed that back into the database, and the database will continue to grow and become a more and more valuable asset to other users over time. For that vision to work, people need to use the model, they need to use the data, they need to tell us what's wrong with it, because we're not going to get everything right first time. And then they need to tell us what they like about it so that we can continue doing more of the same. So that's a plea. If anybody's thinking, oh, could it do this, or could I use it for that? Cerise gave you our address earlier. Please do get in touch. Oh, I should have put that slide up earlier, sorry. So for those not familiar with noise mapping, essentially we build a 3D digital version of the world, or in this case, England. So we've got all the buildings. They are hopefully in the right place, the right shape, the right height. We've got the road network, the rail networks, and they're all attributed with traffic flow data. Input data isn't always available. Where it's not, we make hopefully sensible assumptions for that data. And as I said, over time, as more data becomes available, we can hopefully improve that. But I think at least it will be a significant improvement over how we've done things in the past. And it should be of quality that's useful for local authorities to be able to look at environmental impact assessments and planning decisions, things like that. Initially, we'll incorporate road and rail noise, but it's hopefully flexible enough that we can build in other sources at a later date. The reason aircraft noise isn't there is because it's the airports themselves that do their mapping under the statutory requirement, but we can take their results and overlay them. So we'll be able to see what the total transport noise impact is, not just separate sources. So I mentioned a bit about the accuracy. we believe the limitations to the accuracy will be down to the limitations of the input data. So as input data becomes better, the accuracy will improve. But what we're building in is a way to evaluate the accuracy so that if you're using that data, you know what the uncertainty is around it. So that in itself will then tell you how much reliance you can place on whatever you're doing with that data. The coverage is broader than before. We're not just mapping the major sources that are required by the environmental noise regs and the environmental noise directive. We're hoping to include every road in England. And I'd like to say every railway, but I believe there's one that goes, the very tiny ones that, like the equivalent of the one that goes up Snowdon in Wales, that won't be in there, but all the tram systems, all the Network Rail, all the Transport for London, all of that will be in there, apart from the underground part. This is just above ground sources. And like I say, we're hoping that there'll be a degree of interactivity which allows other data sets to be incorporated, increasing the value of that database over time. So you could overlay your air quality management areas, for example, and see if your noise hotspots intersect with your air quality management areas, as I suspect they might. Or you could overlay data to do with multiple deprivation index and see whether the worst affected areas are the areas of higher deprivation. So to be able to use the model, there will be different levels of access. Sort of things I was talking about, looking at pandemic recovery, that will be something that will be done nationally at a DEFRA level, for example. But then designated users can look at their own areas that they're interested in, carry out their own assessments. And you might just want to look at the results. You've had a planning application in, it's come with a noise report from the consultants. Does this feel right? Yes, no. Let's have a look at DEFRA's data set and we can see if it's in the same ballpark. They'll never be the same because the assumptions will be different that have gone into the modelling. But if they're close, you can place some reliance on what that planning application is telling you. Or you could do your own scenario planning. What happens if I put a barrier here to this local area? How will the noise change for the receptors that I've got? I've got a school down this road. I can do something. I can change the road surface. What happens? And then there'll be a completely public portal that will be outside of all the Ordnance Survey licensing area. General public will be able to view results. We do have something like that at the moment where you can put your postcode in, see whether you're red, green or amber, but hopefully this will provide a bit more detail. So you'll be able to have the data to see what the noise level is, external to noise sensitive receptors, we call them. So that's housing or residential, but also schools, places of worship, buildings like that, nursing homes, care homes and things. It will be overlaid with a population density database. So then you'll be able to estimate how many people are in the building. So you know how many people are exposed to those different levels, because there's not the same number of people in every single house, obviously. And from that, we can then work with Public Health England, or sorry, UK HSA, as they're now called, and look at health impacts. And that ties in with the IGCBM work that Cerise told you about, and colleagues across government. And then we can value that. So you can say, okay, the cost of noise in this area at the moment is this much. If I make this intervention, it will cost that much. Does the cost benefit work? And then the data will also be used for other metrics across government as a public health outcomes framework. We've got an indicator in the 25-year plan that looks at transport noise exposure. And then I've already mentioned different users will have their own different uses. So this is just an example of what a local authority could potentially use the model for. So you could look at a planning application, new housing development, it's next to a nature reserve. Because we're mapping to lower levels as well as covering more noise sources, you'll be able to look at the areas of quiet, relative tranquility, as well as the noisiest areas, which is what we focused on in the past. So then you'd be able to see what's the impact on that green space that, as Tim said, more people are visiting at the moment as a result of the pandemic, and numbers seem to be staying high. So you don't want to lose that by accidentally putting a highway next to it. A lot of that is logical. You could have figured it out for yourself, but this will provide the evidence base to support those decisions. I think that's us. We were expecting to go last, hence the any questions slide, but I believe we're now going to segue online.